breastfeeding is better than formula. Okay, we mentioned Piaget in the first chapter. We talked about how he was one of the theorists that developed one of the most comprehensive theories of how cognitive development takes place. And he certainly did a lot of work on infant cognition. And the first stage that occurs between the ages of 0 and 2, in terms of cognitive development, Piaget called sensory motor intelligence. This was his term for the way that infants think by using their senses and motor skills during the first period of cognitive development. So Piaget, he talked a lot about these things called schemas. Schemas being a mental representation of something. So if I just chose an object such as bike, okay, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of a bike? Okay. Maybe if you own a motorcycle, it's a motorcycle. But maybe if you own a bicycle, it's a bicycle. If you own a road bicycle, probably a road bicycle shows up. If you own a mountain bicycle, then probably a picture of a mountain bike comes up. But that's your schema for bike. Now you probably know that all those different types of objects are bikes. And the reason that you know that is because you assimilated that information over time. So assimilation, that's Piaget's term for a type of adaptation in which new experiences are interpreted to fit into or assimilate with old ideas. So you develop this concept of bike, and then you learn that a motorcycle could be referred to as a bike, or a bicycle could be referred to as a bike. Even though they're very different, you're able to assimilate these two different ideas into the concept of a bike. Okay, accommodation, on the other hand, that was Piaget's term for adaptation, in which old ideas are restructured to include or accommodate new experiences. So, although you learn that both a bicycle and a motorcycle are both referred to as bikes, you also learn that they're not the same type of bike. Okay, you had to accommodate that new information. If you learned a bicycle is a bike first, and then you learned that a motorcycle could also be called a bike. You learned at some point that motorcycle is not the same thing. You adapted your schema for bike such that you now recognize the difference between bicycle and motorcycle. One of the most important developments that takes place in sensory motor intelligence was the idea of object permanence. This is the realization that objects, including people, still exist when they can no longer be seen, touched, or heard. So this is actually a precursor to the idea of abstract thinking. Abstract thinking refers to thinking about things that don't actually exist. The word bike, okay, it doesn't exist anywhere, yet we can still talk about bikes. Okay, there are specific bikes that exist in the world. I have two bikes. Those two bikes both exist, but the word bike itself is abstract because it could refer to anything in the world. And the ability to start thinking about things when they can't be seen, touched, or heard, it starts with object permanence. There are 6 stages in object permanence that Piaget talked about. This is an overview of them. There are 2 stages that can be sort of divided into primary, secondary, and tertiary circular reactions. That's the term that Piaget used. So in stage 1, you're basically dealing with just reflexes: sucking, grasping, staring, listening. In stage 2, from 1 to 4 months, you start to get the first acquired adaptations, accommodation and coordination of reflexes. For example, sucking a pacifier differently from sucking a nipple, grabbing a bottle to suck it. The next 2 stages involve an infant's responses to objects and people. So in stage 3, they start to make interesting sights last. That's how Piaget talked about it. So responding to people and objects, for example, clapping hands when mom says patty cake. The infant, or he or she, would start reacting to something, again, even though it wasn't there, and he wants it to keep going. Stage 4, this is when there's a new adaptation and anticipation, becoming more deliberate and purposeful in responding to people and objects. For example, putting mom's hands together in order to make her start playing patty cake. And then the last 2 stages are the most creative, first with action and then with ideas. These are the tertiary circular reactions in stage 5. He called these new means through active experimentation and creativity in the actions of the little scientist. For example, putting a teddy bear in the toilet and flushing it. In other words, trying things out and seeing what happens. That's kind of what's going on in this stage. In stage 6, you start to remember what has happened before, and now you can sort of start to learn from your previous experiences. I tried this before. I know what happens. Let me try something different this time and see if a different outcome occurs. So Piaget's theory of infant cognition was a little different than the information processing theory. This is a perspective that's modeled on the way that computers function. Again, remember that one of the things that we talked about that differentiates different theories or models of cognitive development is whether development occurs in stages or whether it occurs continuously. The information processing approach suggests that it's a continuous process. Information processing theorists suggest that there's a step-by-step description of the mechanisms of thought that adds insight to our understanding of cognition at every age. And some of the research that's come out of this information processing model has overturned some of Piaget's conclusions, including the concept of object permanence. That specifically, Piaget thought that it all of a sudden appears where it previously wasn't, and that's sort of what a stage is. Again, it's a different way of thinking at one point than it is at another point. According to this information processing model, there's a gradual occurrence where they may develop awareness over the course of time that objects continue to exist when they can't be seen, touched, or felt, or saw, rather. One example of this is the visual cliff experiment. This is a famous study that was designed to look at infant perception of depth. So the visual cliff, it looked like it was an illusion of a sudden drop-off between one horizontal surface and another. So there was basically a glass plate, and it looks as if you can look right through the plate. It looks as if the table drops down, and the scientists that were using this apparatus to study the infant's behavior, they found that mothers were able to urge their 6-month-olds to wiggle forward over the supposed edge of the cliff, but 10-month-olds fearfully refused to budge. So there was a time point in development at which eventually infants might not crawl over there on their own, but they can be coerced into crawling over there if mom sort of urges them to. But mom's urging won't do that at about 10 months old. Classic developmental theorists didn't believe that infants stored no memories in their first year of life. We certainly have no recollection of our first year or even 2 years of life, once we're adults. But that doesn't mean necessarily that we weren't storing memories in the first year of life. It actually turns out now that there's a great deal of evidence to suggest that infants can remember, but that certain conditions need to be met. First of all, most of this research is coming from experiments that are conducted in laboratories. Infants do not just cooperate in the course of their daily lives with what you want them to do, so you usually have to bring them into a laboratory or visit them in their home and set up the conditions in order to test exactly what you're looking for. In order for infants to remember certain information early on, The experimental conditions have to be similar to real life. Also, they have to be motivated, and special measures that aid memory retrieval also need to be in place.